First things first, it's the DU General, Money P. I'ma put you up on the schedule, 6 to 9, 8 weekdays, not doing several. Let's go. We got a lot to talk about, so much to pedal through. Unapologetically progressive. Tune to KBLA 1580 to get the mess. We're your ancestors' favorite radio station. First black on talk radio, left side of the nation. Me and Dominique DePrima go way back. Smiling, making sure the station stays black. Discussing all the issues in our community. We're hosted black and brown and others find unity. So let's talk about it. Maybe we can improve it. Digital underground, always down with the move. So we tune in. The first things first with the queen of Black Talk Radio, Dominique DePrima. Go sis. First things first.
Good morning and God bless. I'm Dominique DePrima. This show is called First Things First, and my first thing every single day, giving thanks, giving praise, asking for blessings from the Most High, asking for the blessings of the ancestors and the elders, and let's go get it. Let's go get it. It's a Tuesday that feels like a Monday. We got a lot to talk about. In fact, we got to put 5 days of conversation into 4 days. And you are invited to call me anytime, 800-920-1580, 800-920-1580 from any city, state, country. You can also connect via social media. It's KBLA 1580 on Instagram, my favorite, on Twitter, on Facebook, all the things. We're streaming right now on YouTube, youtube.com, KBLA 1580. And bam, you'll see I actually woke up in a timely manner today. So I think I look like, I always wake up in a timely manner. Just how slow am I moving? I was moving fast enough to actually look like I'm going to work. So that's a good thing. And we do have a lot to talk about. You know that typically in hour one, we focus on the local. Hour two, we go national, international, beyond. We have freestyle phones where you can bring up any topic of your choosing. And in our final hour, we typically do a deep dive. Well, we're doing a bit of a deep dive on this lovely post Labor Day. And I'm glad you're here. And so we're going to do things a little bit differently. My partner in politics today, you know him from the LA Progressive. You know him from the Conversation Live. And his work as a filmmaker as well. James Farr, good morning.
Good morning, Dominique. How are you?
I'm blessed. And James actually came into the studio. So if you want to see him, come on in. Then we're looking at hour two. We're going to be doing a deep dive on reparations. It's a Talking Point Tuesday. So we're going to be dealing with reparations. It's the perfect topic for a Talking Point Tuesday because there are so many ridiculous talking points. Denise Long will be joining us. You heard from her last week, but we're going to continue that conversation. And then in the third hour, we will have an Olympian actually in studio to talk with us about all things Olympics it's down the road, but it's on the way. Okay, so as you know, 800-920-1580, that's the number that gets you in here, 800-920-1580. And those of you who are familiar with Mr. James Farr know that we're probably talking Pasadena. So if you're a Pasadenian, then it's especially a great day for you to call 800-920-1580. So you brought along a colleague, James.
I did. Good morning. And Bradley Gage, the attorney who is representing the second whistleblower to come from the ranks of the Pasadena Police Department, and with an intent to, and Mr. Gage can speak more about that, but her intent to file a lawsuit. She was placed on leave following an incident where many in the community believe she was attempting to de-escalate a situation between another officer in another horrible situation. And so she's notified the city through her attorney of her intent to file a lawsuit for harassment and discrimination. And like I said, he can speak more to what that looks like.
Right. So the official introduction is that he's been an attorney since 1985 and is a founding partner of Goldberg and Gage. He's admitted to practice in all the courts of the state of California, the Southern District and Central District, and the 5th and 9th districts. And, since becoming an attorney, he's represented prominent individuals, including judges, politicians, city managers, and even police chiefs. Attorney Bradley Gage, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. It's a pleasure. I know that people have heard of this case just because, sadly, it's so rare that we have an officer on-duty officer engage in a way that seems to try to de-escalate the actions of their partner or their fellow officers on the scene. And this is one of those rare instances.
Yes, it is. And it's an important thing that officers are able to do that and to protect the community.
Yeah. So tell us the story of what happened from your perspective, Attorney Gage.
Sure. My officer, Taisyn Crutchfield, has quite an illustrious history of being a national title holder in track and field and Miss Oregon, having a master's degree. And she wanted to become a police officer to help the community, which is a fantastic goal in order to help heal some of the historical problems that we have seen between law enforcement and the communities. In doing that, she came across a situation in which she felt that one of the police officers on the department was engaged in unnecessary excessive force towards a young man. And she tried to stop him from escalating a situation and to calm things down. You would think that she would receive a reward from the department for doing so, but instead she faces discipline.
And we're going to get a little deeper into this and what the implications are, because it seems like sometimes when a story like this, Officer Crutchfield, we've talked about it on this radio station. It's been on national platforms like Grio. Sometimes that brings progress. Other times it brings pushback. Which would you say you're experiencing, Attorney Gage?
Well, I'm seeing pushback in this case.
Yeah.
If progress was being brought, what would happen is the department would say, okay, here's a young officer doing the right thing. We want to encourage that kind of behavior. And they should bring her to roll calls and talk to the other officers about how she stood up, stopped an officer that appeared to be escalating force, putting a young man's face into cactus, really without justification or need. So instead of rewarding her for it, now they're punishing her, which sends the opposite message. It tells officers you should not intercede, tells officers you should allow excessive force, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah, James, you've done an in-depth story on this, and we'll get into that as we come forward. But do you want to add on to what Attorney Gage said, just in terms of the kind of pushback?
I mean, the pushback is certainly there just by the fact that Officer Crutchfield was put on leave. And we know that the other officer that was involved, or kind of at the center of this event, is still currently on the streets, on patrol in the community. And in some cases, some community members have alleged that he's been heavy-handed with them. He's not been the most courteous officer. And so, again, it just seems to be this pattern of reinforcing certain type of behavior within the department, and how it may start at the top and then actually play itself out in community. It's just a lot of incongruency there.
Continuing our conversation, and you're welcome in if you got a question or perspective. 800-920-1580. We're talking with journalist James Farr and attorney Bradley Gage, and you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominic DePrima when we come forward. Your ancestors' favorite radio station, and your favorite morning show host. Let's get back to Dominic DePrima right now.
Right now, we've got attorney Bradley Gage on the phone, and also journalist James Farr with us in studio, and you are invited in 800-920-1580. So, as a journalist, James Farr, give me your rendition of what happened. We heard from the attorney's side, and obviously this story has captured your imagination and your concern. So tell us what happened from your perspective.
Well, from my perspective, this was a tragic event all the way around. And the night of February 20th didn't actually begin then. It began earlier in the year in January when Mr. Charles Towns was shot by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies. That's how we kind of end up into that night. It just so happened that earlier in that day, Sheriff Luna had released the critical incident video. And so that was fresh and new information and visuals of what actually happened to Mr. Towns. And so that's what the family was processing that night. That's what they were in the middle of the street or on the sidewalk or at this unusual, perhaps, hour. And they were processing out loud. Although I haven't been able to confirm, but it's been alleged that the officer at the center of the use of force was present, providing security or perimeter support for the sheriff shooting. Allegedly, he was less than cordial with perhaps some of the family members. So there seemed to be, and you can see this clearly play out on the video, that there was this remembrance of this officer at this other event, and this kind of pushback from these young boys who were like, you're part of who killed my father. And so they were processing out loud. The department put out this horrible narrative of a video, right? But we do see clearly in this video that Officer Crutchfield does come forward. And, I mean, in culture, she looked at Palacio like, dude, like, bruh, like, come on, that sister girl look like, I've seen this act before. This isn't good. And so I believe she stepped in to try to intervene, to just like chill. And he pushed her back off. And now she's in this situation where, but for that incident and the lawsuit brought by attorney Carrie Harper, we wouldn't even know about this incident. She can't even speak about this incident because she's placed on a leave. And then this Wednesday, she will learn her fate, right? And
i.e. tomorrow.
Yes, I'm still thinking today is Monday, but yes, she'll learn whether or not she's going to face some sort of discipline or even termination.
And Attorney Gage, are you getting any sense of where the department is going with this, and how does that impact your case?
Well, it's hard to tell where the department is going because internal affairs investigations are secretive. All I know is that my client was interviewed. I was there. They seemed to be cordial towards her. We went through information, which I'm not at liberty to discuss. And we'll find out where they are coming from, perhaps as early as tomorrow, and perhaps they'll delay things. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. You can't see everything from the video. I have talked with her attorney, with the attorney for Charles Towns, obviously, Carlos Towns, Carrie Harper, about this case. And what she described was, two young people, as you say, letting off steam outside playing with each other, sort of trying to deal with the aftermath of the police shooting of their father. And then the officers came and, came in hot.
Definitely.
That's what, Attorney Carrie Harper said, came in hot and escalated. Now, we didn't talk about much about Officer Crutchfield because that's not what that interview was about. But when I look at the tape, it does look like she barely touches him, or like she's just kind of trying to get his attention, meaning the officer, Ralph Palacios, who is the one that's kind of going off there. And his response to her is, from my perception of my eyes, quite disrespectful.
Definitely. I mean, how dare she put her hands on him, right? That's what I got. And it certainly, it's right there on the video.
I mean, but when you say put your hands on, I'm thinking of someone grabbing someone by the shirt and throwing them down. She like taps him kind of.
Well,
barely.
I mean, language is interesting, right? And,
Yeah.
and we're not being imaginative, but I could say gently touched and they could say pushed and shoved, right? And you can say
yeah, but
grabbed
there's
and
a
put your hands.
videotape.
Well, I mean, I think that's for what is for interpretation, right? I don't certainly see it as anything aggressive. I don't think anyone else sees it as anything aggressive. But I guess I don't know. I mean, it's a personnel issue, so we're not privileged to interview Palacio, but I mean, clearly he responded aggressively.
Attorney Gage, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, why is she on leave? What did she allegedly do wrong? I just don't see it.
Well, the allegations are that she's being put on leave because of her race, that white officers have engaged in far worse conduct and were not put on leave, that she has not been taken off of probation, and she's facing all sorts of potential discipline on a case where clearly she's doing what good officers should do, and that is that she was trying to stop an officer who appeared to be out of control and protect the community. That's her job. She did the right thing.
Okay, but surely they're not saying we're putting you on leave because you're a black woman and black women get stereotyped. When we're smiling, you think we're mad, and when we're not smiling, you think we're menaces. I mean, I know that as a black woman. I'm minding my business and I'm categorized as an angry black woman. But surely, the department's not saying, well, we're putting her on leave because we're using racial stereotypes to evaluate her behavior.
Well, folks almost never say we're using racial stereotypes.
Of course.
That doesn't mean that they're not using them.
Right.
But they did put her on leave, at least in part because of her actions in stopping the male officer from engaging in unnecessary force to a young black man, putting him into a planter with cactus by his face. So that was the beginning of the charges against her. And then they just sort of stacked claims on top of that.
When you say probation, you're talking about her probationary period as an officer, not like criminal probation, just to be clear.
Absolutely correct. All new officers are considered probationary employees until they get off probation, which can be 12 months or 18 months, depending on the department.
Right. Like any job you got. Well, most jobs might be 90 days, but I guess it's longer if you're a cop.
Well, what's different about that? You put that in the context. Up until the sunset of the probation, the chief can terminate an officer for any reason.
Reason.
Or no reason, right?
Like an at-will employee.
At will, right?
Yeah.
But after that probationary period has expired, then they're vested. And so now you kick in and trigger Peace Officer Bill of Rights and a whole nother process to actually remove an officer.
Right, which is where we would typically see the police union stepping in and,
Right.
doing what they do.
Right.
The police association, as BLM says, because they don't consider them unions. To me, they don't function as unions in these type of cases. They function more like cartels because they tend to be trying to make sure that the officer, regardless of their conduct, gets off. Is that happening here? Do you have the police union rushing to the aid of Officer Crutchfield?
I think there's some that are, and I think there's some that are not.
But as an organization,
where
I mean,
I have not seen the organ.
Yeah, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about the organization.
I personally have not seen the organization stepping forward, but that doesn't mean that they aren't.
Okay.
They haven't reached out to me.
We're going to take a wait and see on that one. What's your impression, James?
I mean, at least not publicly. Like I said, we shouldn't know about this. This should not be in the public eye at all. But for the actions of all of the officers that are involved, right? It's now a public discussion. It's a concern within community, whether or not this officer who has vested herself in community policing, and I write about this in the LA Progressive piece, she wanted to be the change agent. She wanted to help bridge the widening gap that already exists between folks who live north of the 210 freeway in Pasadena. And so, if this is the standard, and we kind of looked at the things the last time we were here with Attorney Romero and his client, the current Lieutenant Sammy De Silva, who has brought forth a whistleblower case of saying that these are things that are baked into all of these processes, right? It really gives the community a great deal of angst, concern, trepidation, and there's just not a whole lot of trust.
Because she was still in her probationary period, Officer Crutchfield, her case is in the hands of the chief, right? Correct, attorney?
Well, whether she was probationary or not, the chief will make the decision of any discipline and the amount of discipline.
And so, go ahead.
The only difference is if you are a probationary employee, you don't have certain administrative rights that an officer who has gone through probation has. So certain rights to appeal within the civil service context.
All right, we only have a minute here till news, traffic, and sports. I'm curious. We'll get into this a little bit more on the other side, but I'm curious, what you think community can even do at this point, other than pay attention.
The community can be vocal. I think they can say that we aren't going to put up with this racial inequality towards police officers, or us as a community with racial profiling. Both sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we say, where are the good officers? We always talk about, for those who accept that paradigm, that is a few bad apples. I think it's a few bad systems. But if, in fact, as you say, we're asking people, officers of the law who mean to do the right thing, to step up, we certainly can't stand by when they're punished for doing so. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DePrima when we come forward. Thanks for waking up with Dominique DePrima on KBLA Talk 1580.
And with me in studio right now, LA Progressive and the Conversation Live's James Farr. And also on the phone, Attorney Bradley Gage. And a little bird told me that you were one of the attorneys on the estate of one Notorious B.I.G., which I know is not his legal name, but it's certainly a point of interest for folks listening. You seem to have a wide variety of clients, from a judge to a legendary rap artist.
Yes, we represented the family of Christopher Wallace, better known as Notorious B.I.G., in a civil rights case against LAPD for his death. against Rafael Perez from the Rampart scandal and other officers.
Yeah. Well, this case, we're talking about Taisyn Crutchfield, an attorney. You know, as I said, I spoke with attorney Carrie Harper. She's actually a friend, and we talked about the case from the perspective of her client, who is suing over this very same incident. And one of the things that I found so confusing is how does it end up? How does it end up that she's on leave and the perpetrators are not on leave? And you say, James, in your story that one of the supervisors on the scene is also an internal affairs investigator.
Well, that's what attorney Carrie Harper is alleging in her lawsuit, is that the three, Officer Palacio, the on-scene sergeant or supervisor, and the internal affairs supervisor, Lieutenant Kirby, conspired to bake in this story that in effect would have put Officer Crutchfield on a leave. But I think what's also interesting is this, and you're surprised that Officer Palacio isn't on leave. When do you ever see police go hands-on with someone? You know, Attorney Gage and Harper have, and the video, right? We all know that what happened with the young Carlos Towns and the physical assault, that was him being, as Harper referred to it, face planted, right, into the planter. But often when officers do go hands-on, a person is charged at minimum with a PC 148, which is some sort of resisting, right? And so in the post events, we see that this family was not charged with anything. They were not arrested, although they alleged through their lawsuit that they were. But since they weren't arrested, since they weren't, the department is basically saying that there was no use of force, right? There was no categorical use of force. So that even changes how they report that information out to our Police Oversight Commission, to the public. It's almost as if no one knew about this, no one would have known about this. And that's the space that the procedural process operates in, where the public is, these things aren't done in full transparency.
Well, I mean, it's that fine line, right? I mean, they were definitely detained. They were handcuffed. The mother was also, detained.
Well, that's
so
the court will work that part out, right?
Exactly.
That's were they arrested or were they not? But at what point are officers allowed to put their hands on someone, right? And then they typically, as Harper pointed out, that's a contempt of cop situation, right? You're going to get charged with something,
right? It seems like the police chief would want to make an example of this in the way that, see, we have a good cop, we have good cops, we have people that are ready to come forward. But as you said, Attorney Gage, that is not the response, at least so far, from the chief. We will see what they say when they come back. But is it true that there are no Black women on the force?
It's my understanding that Taisyn is the only Black female on the police department. And also, whether there's
stunning.
an arrest or not.
Right.
Yeah. Whether there's an arrest or not, and I think when there's a custodial interrogation and you're put into a police car, that constitutes an arrest. But regardless, the use of force by an officer is not dictated by whether it was an arrest, but whether it was necessary and reasonable under the circumstances. And so it's a standard that you look at objectively what the police officer did at that time with what they knew at that moment. And it certainly seems that the amount of force used was more than necessary, and that's exactly why Officer Crutchfield interceded in order to stop it from getting more serious.
Yeah. And you're alleging harassment. What else is she? And by the way, I assume that what James Farr wrote in his article is correct, that it doesn't matter how they rule. In other words, if the chief or the department comes back and says, you know what, our bad, she is not going to be disciplined at all, the lawsuit still goes forward?
Well, anything is possible depending on how the department reacts. But they've already punished her more than they should have. Being relieved of duty, she's deprived of overtime opportunities, she's deprived of training opportunities, she's stigmatized. This came out into the public before we could do anything about it. So she's well known. You'll be able to look her up on the internet 10 years from now and know that she had been relieved of duty. That's going to affect her career and her reputation from now until the end of her work life.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that even if it wasn't on the internet, it's on the police-er-net. And so, I wonder, how safe or how productive her work environment could conceivably be moving forward.
There's always that risk. I have represented police officers in the past, just like Officer Crutchfield, who have done the right thing and reported wrongdoing, and then all of a sudden there's no backup and they're put into dangerous situations. Or look at the classic movie Serpico. So whistleblowers do have risks in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
James, go ahead.
No, she absolutely should be concerned, in terms of what her future looks like. And when you talk with officers who, as Mr. Gage is pointing out, they're ostracized. And so those are real concerns. But again, this young lady had deep ties to the community. Her father was a star athlete, high school athlete, and went on to play Division I football. And so, these are the officers that we want. And the department missed an opportunity for some informed trauma care when they responded to this scene initially. I mean, you see the video, you see these boys in pain and the hurt that they're going through, but instead there's this almost instinct, right? Some may even call it predatory, right? Where it is absolutely okay to physically assault Black people and Black folks in
And
community
Black children.
and Black children, right?
Yeah.
In front of their mother, right? I mean, who, arguably, if this were a little bit west of the Rose Bowl in that community, I doubt that these officers would have come in with such a level of disconcern, right? Yeah. I mean, this was put out as an emergency, and they came in hot.
And I mean, and the fact that if you didn't know when you came, that once you figured out that those are the children of someone that was murdered by my department, or you might not put it that way, someone whose life unfortunately ended by the department, you would think that there would be a level of sensitivity to that. And I don't see that at all.
No, I mean, it wasn't the same department, but in that, and we're saying the same thing. This was police, right? This is law enforcement. And one of them they believe was present.
Well, because you're saying it was Pasadena Sheriff's.
It was a sheriff's.
But they were weren't they working in collaboration with the PD? No.
Well, the Pasadena was providing perimeter because of the proximity,
right.
the borders, right? So Pasadena is kind of providing as mutual aid, if you will,
right.
Perimeter support, extra units,
right, for the Pasadena Sheriff's.
Correct.
Right. And so I guess you could say technically not. Go ahead, Attorney Gage.
According to the Knox lawsuit, they claim in that lawsuit that Officer Palacios was involved in the January 22nd, 2023 shooting of Charles Towns. And clearly it was the Sheriff's Department involved in the shooting, but that Palacios and others were on the perimeter. And according to the lawsuit, Palacios was heavy-handed towards the family back in January. So there was this history between him and them a month earlier than this February incident.
Right, which, tracks with what I have seen in certain cases where certain officers seem to harass the families of people whose loved ones were killed by police or sheriffs. And it's unfathomable to me. When we come forward, I want to talk about, what's the best case scenario? what is the desired outcome here from your perspective and yours as well, Mr. Farr. That's next on KBLA Talk 1580.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580. This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
Okay, so just to be clear, I guess, Piers, I may have made folks confused. It's a confusing situation. I may have been a bit unclear. So in the case of Carlos Towns, the dad who was killed, he was killed by the Pasadena sheriffs.
Correct.
Which is a partner agency to the Pasadena Police Department because they're right next door to each other. And so what you were saying, Attorney Bradley Gage, is that that Officer Palacios, who is a Pasadena PD, he's not a sheriff, may have been on the scene because he was providing perimeter support for the Pasadena sheriffs. Not that he actually, that he actually shot Carlos Towns, or not that Attorney Harper is saying he was involved with the shooting, but just saying that he may have been on that scene as security on the perimeter, as support, right?
That's pretty much correct. Yes. So the Altadena station is part of the LA County Sheriff's Department. They're the ones that were involved, as I understand it from the lawsuits, in the shooting of Charles Towns. The Pasadena Police Department was providing the perimeter on that shooting. If you look at the lawsuit by the Knox family, it is alleged that Officer Palacios was one of the people that was at the location, and they allege in the lawsuit that he was too aggressive. Got
it. So then back to my question, which was, what does success look like? What is the best case scenario for you, for your client, Officer Taisyn Crutchfield, Attorney Bradley Gage?
Well, the best case scenario would be that we prevail on all of the charges, that they all are unfounded, so that she can continue being a police officer, that she can get off probation and have a cleaned up package. That is the right scenario for her administratively. If that doesn't work, then the best scenario would be a lawsuit that we prevail on eventually against the department.
Damages.
Damages are extensive here. You have a young officer who makes a good living as a police officer, who, no matter what happens, she has become pickled and she never will return to being a cucumber. Her reputation is damaged. Her earning potential is affected. And this is something that can result in millions of dollars of damages.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that moves. And I'm told there is one other cop there in the Pasadena Police Department who's out on leave, and who also claims she's been passed over multiple times for promotions, a Lieutenant Gordon, which is interesting because it means you're 0 for 2 with Black women in the department. What about this duty to intervene? Let's talk about that when we come forward. Like, I believe there's a law, right, in the state of California,
yes,
that you can't just let your fellow officer Rodney King somebody. I want to talk about that when we continue on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580. Find a righteous rage and don't be afraid to say what you see. We're KBLA Talk 1580.
And the LA Progressive in the Conversation Lives, James Farr is with us. He's a journalist. And also we have Attorney Bradley Gage, who's representing Officer Taisyn Crutchfield and has many, many other cases going on. But talk to me, I don't know if you want to start, James, about this duty to intervene, that in fact we should see more officers being held accountable for not intervening in these situations rather than what we're seeing here, which is an apparent punishment for doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah. Back in 2021, Pasadena resident, our former council member, former mayor, and now 41st Assembly member Christopher Holden sponsored legislation, as well as there were a host of other bills that were passed at that time that Governor Newsom signed into law. But this came as a result from the George Floyd murder, where officers in California are now required to report excessive force. And it is based upon what a reasonable officer believes is excessive force. And if they do not report this in real time and immediately, they also could be disciplined the same as the officer who was committing the excessive force. And so the question that should be asked is, why didn't any of the other officers on scene kind of see what was going on? To your point, Pasadena is such a small agency. And so these same officers are on patrol within the same community. So you'll see a cross-pollination of different actors or officers involved in certain scenes right throughout the city, just playing different roles. One time they're the shooter, the next time they're the cover officer.
So we only have a couple minutes here, but Attorney Gage, what do you say about this duty to intervene? It seems like I've never heard of a case, even when we see egregious tapes where a department goes, well, you didn't intervene, so now you're in trouble, you're on leave.
Well, they only go after an officer for not intervening when something goes viral and you can see the officers in a video engaging in outrageous uses of force and others standing around not doing anything about it. So,
yeah, I guess George Floyd is the only one I've ever heard of where it actually happened. But sorry, go ahead.
George Floyd is an excellent example, but it's not the only one, but it's very rare. And that's part of the problem. When officers do intervene, like Taisyn Crutchfield did in this case, they can stop a situation from becoming the next George Floyd. So she did the right thing. She kept things under better control. The sergeant, seeing the situation between her and Officer Palacios, then he came and he separated them and everything was made de-escalated. Once that happened, then the family members who had been arrested and handcuffed at least, then they were unhandcuffed and they were let go with no charges brought against them. So fortunately, she stopped this from escalating, and then the sergeant came forward and it was de-escalated further.
Well, I want to thank you guys both for sharing this story with us. Quickly, just give us your contact, social media, or whatever it is you want to let the people know about.
James Farr Live on Twitter, social.
Attorney Gage
on Instagram, and it's goldberggage.com for my website, or 818-340-9252 for the office, 818-340-9252 office number.
Well, Attorney Bradley Gage and journalist James Farr, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Dominique.
KBLA Talk 1580.